The Arizona sun hung high and merciless over the weary bones of Dusty Hollow, pouring its relentless heat into every crack and crevice of the small frontier town. The thick, dry air carried the sharp, acrid scent of dust and sweat, each breath a reminder of toil and survival. Life here moved to the rhythm of hard labor and quiet suffering. Rufus stood at the edge of the auction yard, a man of broad shoulders, leathered skin, and eyes that had seen too much to be easily stirred. He wasn't in town for any particular reason. He rarely was. The ranch he tended out on the edge of nowhere kept him busy enough. Still, the occasional cattle auction drew him from solitude, if only for a moment's break from the silence and a glimpse of livestock worth breeding. His boots rested in the dust as he leaned against the wooden rail, watching the scene unfold with a kind of slow-moving patience that marked men like him steady, silent, and unreachable. Wagons groaned under the weight of goods, horses snorted and shifted restlessly, and voices barked bids through the dry air, tangled together with the squeak of leather harnesses and the creak of old wheels. The faces in the crowd were baked and lined by desert sun, shaped by lives spent wrestling survival out of barren land. Then something moved, a strange, desperate shift on the periphery of his vision, and Rufus turned. By the tracks, huddled beside a sagging pile of discarded crates and broken glass, a woman knelt. Her figure was slumped, shoulders drawn in as if trying to shrink from the world. The fabric of her dress clung to her in places, torn and caked. In dust, he couldn't see her face, but her body spoke volumes. Every line of it was carved with despair. She didn't belong here. Not like this, not like refuse among refuse. People passed without stopping, eyes sliding over her like she was part of the ground. Maybe they were numb. Maybe they just didn't care. Rufus stayed still for a long moment, his heartbeat a quiet thud in his chest, drowned by the rising murmur of Dusty Hollow's mid-morning chaos. But something inside him, something old and buried deep, stirred. He started walking, his boots crunching across the scorched ground. He didn't have a plan, just a pull he couldn't explain. Like her sorrow had latched onto his own and wouldn't let go. When he reached her, he paused. Her sobs were soft and strained, the kind you try to muffle when the world no longer feels safe enough to cry in. He cleared his throat, the sound awkward and abrupt in the stillness. "Ma'am, you all right?" She flinched, lifting her head. Slowly, her face was streaked with tears and grime, her cheeks hollow, lips dry and cracked. Her eyes, large and rimmed in shadow, stared up at him with something between fear and resignation. She didn't answer right away. The words looked like they hurt to form. Finally, she whispered, "June," like the syllables were all she had left of herself. Her voice was hoarse, like it hadn't been used in days. Rufus extended his hand. It was rough, scarred from years of work, a stark contrast to her frailty. He didn't say another word, just stood there, offering her the only thing he could, a moment of humanity. She hesitated, then slowly reached out. Her hand trembled, delicate, fingers curling around his. That single touch undid something in her. It wasn't kindness she expected, it was that she'd forgotten what kindness even looked like. He helped her rise, steadying her like he would a skittish mare, never pushing, just present. Without asking anything more, he turned and led her, away from the chaos of the town square, away from gawking eyes and indifferent shoulders. The sun climbed higher, but it seemed to soften somehow as they walked together through the dust and heat. His horse and wagon waited at the edge of town, the old wooden frame weathered but strong. He handed her his canteen, and she drank like it was salvation. Then, wordlessly, he helped her up into the wagon's bed, and she collapsed against the worn wood, her body yielding to the strange comfort of being carried. He climbed up beside her, took the reins in his weathered hands, and with a soft click of his tongue, the horse pulled forward, and Dusty Hollow slowly faded into the shimmering heat behind them. They traveled in silence, the land slowly changing as the wagon rolled on. The plains gave way to rugged hills and scattered cacti that stood like survivors in a world that devoured the weak. The quiet between them was not empty, it held space, room for breath and thought. June sat beside him, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the world stretched out in a haze of gold and heat. Inside her, something shifted, too small to name, but present all the same. a spark buried deep within the ashes of her wrecked spirit. When the wagon finally turned into a broad valley, Rufus's home came into view, a small house of sturdy wood nestled against the hills, a barn standing close by, and a wide corral. Beyond it, everything about the place echoed order and simplicity. The ranch was a living thing, molded by a man who spoke little but felt deeply. The air here was drier, cleaner, laced with the scent of sun-baked pine and horse sweat. He helped her down and led her into the house. It was quiet, the kind of silence that didn't press or judge, only waited. The furniture was plain, but built to last, every item in its place. He handed her a bundle of clean clothes, coarse cotton, faded but soft, and pointed to a small side room with a basin and towel. When she changed, the feel of fresh fabric against her skin was almost unbearable. She hadn't known how far she'd fallen until she touched something clean again. By the time she returned, Rufus had prepared a simple stew. She sat and ate, spoon trembling between bites, and as the warmth spread through her stomach, her eyes welled. Again, not from sorrow this time, but from the shock of safety. The chair beneath her, the food before her, the roof above her, all of it felt like miracles stitched together with mercy. She began to talk, not all at once, not in detail, but enough. Enough for Rufus to see the shape of her pain. She didn't name the men who hurt her. She didn't say where she came from or what she ran from. She only said she needed work, needed something to keep her from falling apart. He nodded. The words he did speak, few, but solid. "You can stay here," he said, his voice gravel and earth. "There's always work on a ranch. It's not easy, but it's honest." He showed her to the room she'd use, a modest space with a small bed, a window facing the hills, and the first true stillness she'd known in years. That night, she fell into sleep like a stone into water, pulled under by exhaustion and the faintest thread of peace. The days that followed blurred into quiet motion. She rose with the sun, helped feed the chickens, gathered eggs in a woven basket, her steps becoming steadier with each task. She learned to patch fences, lead horses, to water, and ride in a saddle without fear. Rufus watched without comment, but there was a change in his eyes, something softer than the man Dusty Hollow knew. June worked hard, not to earn his favor, but because the rhythm of the ranch became her own kind of healing. The weight of the past didn't disappear, but it didn't press as hard anymore. And when she looked up at the sky, she no longer wondered how far she could run. She began to wonder how far she could stay. She found rhythm in the ranch life, a rhythm unlike anything she had ever known, built not of chaos or fear, but of quiet tasks and honest effort. There was a steadiness in the early morning light, in the creak of the porch boards, the scrape of boots against dry earth, the scent of fresh hay and saddle leather. Every small job became a grounding ritual. June began to move through her days with purpose, and with each sunrise, she uncovered a strength in herself she didn't know had survived. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. She felt something stirring inside her chest, something long buried beneath the wreckage of old hurts, a will to live, truly live. And in that daily rhythm, something unspoken began to change between them. Rufus, ever the quiet man, began offering her fragments of his day at trouble with a stubborn calf, the shifting patterns of the wind, the drought biting harder than expected. He spoke not in grand speeches but in small, steady offerings, and June received them with a growing ease. She, in turn, didn't reach into her past. She had no desire to look backward, but she shared her present, the way the sunrise painted the barn roof gold, how she had grown to love the slow blink of the old mare, the comfort of warm stew at the end of a long day. They built something between them with these simple exchanges, a thread of trust spun slow and sure, forged not in declarations, but in shared labor and silent understanding. The ranch, once Rufus's solitary fortress, began to feel like something different. It breathed with their combined presence, with her laughter when the chickens chased her across the yard, with his rare smiles when she managed to rope a fence post on the first try. It was no longer just land and wood and labor. It was beginning to feel like home. Then the sky darkened. One of those fierce desert storms descended from the horizon without mercy. The air turned to fire and grit, the wind howling like something ancient and angry had been stirred from the depths. Red dust rose in swirling clouds, choking the sky and swallowing the land whole. Rufus was already moving, his body driven by years of knowing how fast these storms could kill. He rushed from corral to barn, securing gates, tying ropes, moving animals with firm, hurried hands. June, heart pounding, didn't stay inside. Fear tugged at her, but something stronger shoved her forward, something born of purpose and belonging. She wrapped a kerchief around her face, pulled her coat tight, and ran out into the storm, determined to help. The wind shoved her sideways, the dust stinging her eyes, but she kept going, driven not by duty, but by a fierce loyalty that had taken root in her bones. Then came the barn door torn loose. Screaming on its hinges, Rufus was straining to hold it, his body locked in a battle against the fury of the storm. Without thinking, June hurled herself beside him, pushing her shoulder against the splintering wood. Her weight slight but unyielding, the storm howled around them, the dust like fire on their skin. But she didn't falter. He didn't push her away. Side by side, they fought, sweat and grit and desperation painting their faces until at last, with a final heave, they got the door sealed. They slumped there together, breath ragged, covered in red earth and sweat. The world shrieked beyond the barn walls, but between them, something had changed. She turned to him, her chest heaving, her face streaked and raw, and in his eyes, she saw at that flicker of something unguarded, concern, relief, a deep, wordless connection that had nothing to do with duty and everything to do with truth. Rufus. She gasped, barely audible over the wind. Her voice cracked, torn raw by emotion. You saved me. The words trembled between them, then rose again, stronger. You saved me, she said. And it was more than thanks, it was an unraveling of everything she had buried. All the wounds, all the fear, all the quiet longing to be seen. Her eyes filled with tears that no dust could hide, and in his gaze, she saw it, not just pity, not just kindness, but recognition. He reached for her hand, rough fingers wrapping around hers, and in that moment, the storm itself seemed to quiet around them. When the wind finally died, the world outside looked different, scrubbed raw, coated in red dust like powdered rust across the earth. The air was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of soaked creosote and churned soil. The sky cracked open, letting in pale sunlight, soft and golden. The land was changed, and so were they. In the days that followed, something lingered from that moment, something neither of them named. Their touches became unhurried, lingering. Her hand brushed his when passing a rope. His fingers grazed her back when helping her down from the saddle. Glances held just a little longer. Their silences deepened, but not from discomfort. The space between them was now charged with something warmer, something alive. June saw Rufus differently. She saw through the silence and the weathered lines to the man underneath, a man who had quietly offered her the only thing that had ever truly mattered, a place to begin again. And Rufus, who had spent a lifetime wrapped in solitude, began to feel something unfamiliar, a lightness in his chest, a quiet peace in her presence. The silence he had once clung to no longer felt like armor. It felt like space he could share. Each day they built something wordless, real, a partnership not declared but lived. The fence lines held stronger. The animals moved more easily with her soft voice nearby. The house, once cold and spare, carried the scent of baked bread, the sound of two sets of boots returning each evening. It was not grand. It was not dramatic. It was simply theirs. One evening, as the sky surrendered to the sunset, pouring molten color across the hills, they sat on the porch together. The light burned low and warm, brushing across her face, making her hair glow like copper and gold. The air was still, the smell of dry sage and sun-warmed wood drifting softly on the breeze. The hush of dusk wrapped around them like a familiar blanket. Rufus sat quiet beside her, his hands resting on his knees. The silence stretched between them, not awkward, not unsure, but heavy with thoughts unsaid. Then he turned to her. His eyes, usually steady and unreadable, were open, bare. June, he said, and the sound of her name in his voice felt like something sacred. I don't want to be alone anymore. The words were quiet, but they struck like thunder. Not a plea, not a performance, just truth. June felt her chest tighten, her breath catch, tears threatening again. She turned to him, her voice trembling with joy too big to hold. "I don't want you to be either, Rufus," she whispered. "I want to stay here, with you." He didn't smile, not with his mouth, but his eyes shone, and he reached for her hand, their fingers entwining with the ease of something long meant to be. There were no flowery declarations, no dramatic confessions, just two people who had walked through fire and dust and found each other on the other side. Their love wasn't born in a rush. It had been slow-built, like the fences they mended, like the porch beneath their feet piece by careful piece. It was a love rooted in quiet resilience, in shared labor, in the simple miracle of being seen and accepted, scars and all dot, and beneath the endless desert sky, studded with stars that stretched forever, June and Rufus found not just love but peace, a quiet home carved into the Arizona earth, forged not by escape, but by return. They married in the same stillness that had built their bond, a traveling preacher, a pair of simple rings, and the wide-eyed gaze of the horses looking on. It was small, it was sacred. It was theirs, and the horizon, once a symbol of distance and loss, now shimmered with possibility. Their future let the land around them vast, untamed, and full of promise.